I'm still looking at the inflation numbers for September. Joining me now is Clement Igbanuro, Senior Analyst, Financial Derivatives Company. That's an economist, actually, FDC. Thank you for joining us. Good morning.
Good morning, Ladi. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you, but not so fine with that inflation data out yesterday, 26.72%, and food inflation hitting about 30%. Talk to me, how much can the consumer take at this time, the Nigerian consumer?
Actually, Ladi, the Nigerian consumer is taking so much. If we say the Nigerian consumer is squeezed, is understatement. For example, when you look at the per capita income in Nigeria as for 2023, revised per capita income data by IMF, it is $1,755. The minimum wage is $39. For a year is $400. So you look at the gap, you discover that if you look at the minimum wage, if we play the minimum wage versus what a consumer is to spend, the average monthly cost of living is $620. If you run it for a year, that is $704. So if you use the per capita income of 1,750, the consumer is still living on edge. If you use the minimum wage of 400, there is even nowhere for the consumer to find himself. So it's a big problem. Inflation is a thief of value, you know, and for us to have had inflation at this rate from 2021 till now, and expected that by December it will even get to about 30% by IMF estimate, that is really a big deal for the Nigerian consumer. That is going to affect consumption, and that is going to affect aggregate demand, and it requires very urgent and serious policy attention.
Urgent attention at this time. With the way we're going, can we win this war, against inflation? Because we're seeing in other climes, inflation is starting to, ease. How do we realistically win this war in the short term?
Ladi, you remember a section we had sometimes last year when we were talking about Russia-Ukraine war as the cause of inflation. I disagreed that the Russia-Ukraine war was not the main cause of inflationary pressure in Nigeria. And it was too late for us to begin to discover that the external headwinds we are attributing the cause to was not actually the real cause. The real cause are domestic, and one of them is fiscal dominance. You've been raising interest rates since May. You've even raised interest rate much more than those who have gotten results, but we've not gotten results. One of the reasons is because we have very serious problem of fiscal dominance. If you look at the half-year report for expenditure for federal government, you discover that deficit, what we budgeted for deficit, we even had to go 102%. That is above what we budgeted. And for our debt has more than doubled in 1 year. And so when you see this situation where you are trying to contract or tighten the monetary condition, and then from the fiscal corridor, you see a whole lot of what I may call fiscal rascality. Because if you look at the performance for half year, you discover there's no expenditure rationalization. If you have inflationary problem, you begin to think expenditure rationalization. How do I raise revenue and reduce unnecessary expenditure so that I will reduce the borrowing burden? The debt servicing was for half year was at about 100%, 99.7% for half year. And so that fiscal factor is a big factor that is driving inflation. We need to begin to reconsider it. But another thing that is very significant is that if you look at global food index, year over year, it has declined by about 20%. In Nigeria, food inflation has risen to over 30%. One of the factors is logistics problem. There are no roads. So if you look at the urban and rural inflation, you see it widening. The reason is because even when you have the food, it is already given that we have so much post-harvest losses estimated at over 40%. We have low yield, but even the one you produce cannot even get through because the roads are too bad. So by the time they even get to places where they are needed, the cost has more than doubled, and that is a very big factor. And then we still have exchange rate problem. And for you to have had your exchange rate depreciate by over 40% in 1 year, you don't expect to have inflation at single digits. So there are real problem on ground. And I think those will take a priority around the policy corridor, both fiscal and monetary policies.
When we talk about, monetary policy, definitely your mind goes to either tightening rates or loosening or holding. But what else does the MPC have in their arsenal to tackle inflation? What else is there?
So far, I think a measure of results is changes in the indicators you are monitoring. That's what baffled some of us last time when the former SYCB governor was saying that the counterfactual evidence is showing that they're making effort. There's nothing like counterfactual evidence. You have raised rates to 18.75, and the short-term interest rate is still at around 11%. It means something is still wrong with it. The liquidity is still high. So when you raise interest rate, you're expected to tighten the monetary condition, but the monetary condition is still loose. So it means that the CBN is not yet utilizing the arsenals within their reach that it's supposed to apply to tighten the monetary conditions. And the reason is this: you need to prioritize your macroeconomic objectives. So when you said you are pursuing growth and you are pursuing price stability, at the time that price is at record high, you're going to lose both. So the CBN primary mandate is not growth. It needs to be made very clear. This idea of supporting, we want to support growth, we want to support this one. No, you have to, the primary mandate of the CBN is price stability. But Ladi, if you get price stability right, you will get growth. If you don't get price stability right, growth will elude you. And so the CBN will need to rethink and refocus on its core mandate. You can't be tightening with one hand and be loosening with the other hand. We are hopeful that with the new players at the helm of affairs in CBN, they'll be able to begin to redirect their focus to what matters most, and that is price stability, both general price level and exchange rate.
Yeah, quite an interesting take there. And talking about the budget, we see the federal government proposing 26 trillion naira for 2024 fiscal year. Oil price benchmark at $73.96 a barrel, and 21% interest rate. How are you seeing this?
Yeah, well, on one side is a good news. Good news because the budget is coming early. Give and take. I understand that the MDAs are expected to submit their budget proposal by the end of this month. So it's expected that if everything is, the Senate and everybody is up and doing, by the end of the year, the budget is going to be passed. So that's good news. It's also good news that nominally, the budget is coming at 26 as against 21.83 in 2023. But then on the other flank, we need to look at two baskets. In one bucket is the budget benchmark, and the other bucket is the budget provisions. And I'm getting worried when I look at the benchmark and the provisions. The benchmark of oil benchmark of 1.7 for me, Q1 to Q3 so far, the average oil production is 1.2 million barrels per day. Now we are projecting 1.7. I'm hearing the news of 1.7 everywhere as the October output. By the time OPEC releases its report by next month, we will know what the actual value is, because we're hearing different values. But for real value, the data we know, the average for the year so far is 1.2, and then you are budgeting for 1.7. I think that does not sound realistic. But what worries me most is the growth projection. In the past 8 years, the average growth per year is 1.5. And IMF is projecting that in 2024, we are going to grow by 3%. And then we are assuming 3.7%. What it means is that you are going to raise your expectation of revenue from companies because we believe that they are going to have stellar performance and are going to post more revenue and more tax. At the end of the day, will you realize it? Because if you are building a foundation, a house on a wobbling foundation, is a recipe for chaos. That is on one flank. But then, Ladi, I took time to look at the estimates, the provisions, and I get worried. Why? When you look at 26 trillion naira as a nominal value, it looks big. But if you deflate it, if you discount inflation, using 2023 as a base year, then it is 26 trillion naira. Sorry, it is 20 trillion naira, not 26, which means it is less than the provision of 2023. Again, if you use the dollar to adjust the value, what is the dollar value for 2023 and the dollar value for 2024? The 2023 is $46 billion, while 2023 is $34 billion. It means that the provision per head for 2024 is $150 per head, while 2023 was $208 per head. That provision cannot actually, because when we said that the average Nigerian is living on edge with a minimum wage of $400 per year and per capita income of $1,755, and then the budgetary provision is even decreasing, it means that there is not going to be respite for the average Nigerian, for the Nigerian consumer, or the aggregate household consumption. And that has very serious implications for business, for firms. Because if the household consumption is constrained, then it means that corporate performance is going to be constrained. And don't forget that interest rate is going to remain high for the whole of 2024. And IMF is projecting that average inflation for 2024 will be 23%. That is going to be a hard time for businesses. And so if you combine all of these things for businesses, that means that there is high risk of corporate mortality, financial instability, and that will not sound very well for the health of the economy. And I think these things should be part of what the government should put in focus in further considerations of the budget provisions.
Right, I guess consumers need to breathe for businesses to survive going forward. Thank you so much. Clement Igbanugo, economist, Financial Derivatives Company. Thank you.
You're welcome.